Welcome to Modern Aikidoist podcast. My sincere thanks to listeners and those who have liked, subscribed, and commented. Your interest is noticed and deeply appreciated. For this episode, we're interviewing Tony Pacenski, who is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, and he's got quite a background. We had a great talk just a few days ago, and the subject of that talk was kind of about the future of the martial arts and where martial arts in general tend to be going. So we want to sort of format our discussion with that, but we're going to go off into kind of some different areas too. So, Tony, welcome to the podcast, and maybe we'll start with having you give a little bit of your background for listeners that may not be familiar with you.
Yes, thank you for having me, Tristan. This is a good opportunity right now to have a nice discussion. And before we get started, just thank you for having me, taking the time to do this podcast.
You're welcome.
All right. So my background originally, I started in Taekwondo when I was like teenager, 13 years old, and I was wrestling in camps, and the Ultimate Fighting Championship started, and I sent away for the tapes because I had a subscription to Inside Kung Fu. I always wanted to do like Wing Chun and Bruce Lee, things like that. And this is just out. I live in a suburb just outside Philadelphia, and as luck would have it, I got on the mailing list with the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in Torrance, California, and they had an instructor, one of the first American instructors to come out of the Gracie Academy, and he was Steve Maxwell, and he had an academy in Philadelphia called Maxercise. So I went down there, and everyone was doing jiu-jitsu like it was on the UFC 1 and 2, and I felt like I hit the jackpot. And I just turned 16 years old, and my mother allowed me to go down to the city, coming from the suburbs, and I just fell in love with jiu-jitsu and the Gracie family approach. And now I'm here 25 years later, from going from 16 years old now 41 years old, and it's been a nice, amazing arc of experience training in with the Gracie family, making transitions with the Japanese jiu-jitsu, and now in the military, in the Air Force, combatives and things like that, and some other things, just training all over the world.
Sure. We had a good part of our conversation sort of covered an interesting project that you have going on that you're about to release. Maybe you could give a few details about what that is.
Sure, that's good. Again, a lot of my training has been influenced in the Brazilian style of jiu-jitsu, or jiu-jitsu from Brazil. And along the way, I started to train Yushishuni combat jiu-jitsu with Michael D. Pasquale Jr. He was a big advocate for me to understand jiu-jitsu because he always had the magazines coming out of New Jersey and the New York area. He had the magazine International Karate. So before the Gracies, it was his magazines, and I was always intrigued with judo and jiu-jitsu, being able to throw someone on the ground and being able to do that. And, just reading his stories and things like that. And then the Gracies was on the UFC, and, I wanted to train that. So when I moved from Philadelphia to California to do the instructor's training with the Gracie family, I always kept a good relationship with Michael D. Pasquale Jr. from a distance. It was good. And eventually I was able to do like a distance study. And before 10, 15 years later into this, I, made the transition from civilian life to the Air Force. And I had that window of opportunity, maybe like 4 months before I shipped out. And I would go and train at his school and learn his system, at least the combat system. And one of the byproducts of that was when you start doing the Japanese style jiu-jitsu, the Yushishuni style, there's all the nuances of the wrist locks and learning how to do joint manipulation and the unique pins that he endorses. And I really like that. And it was all about, how can you turn somebody and put them on their face, drive their shoulder into the ground? The arresting technique, what would be essentially the Taho Jitsu. And, I kept that with me, and I wanted to kind of incorporate the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the wrestling, the mixed martial arts, everything, but really focus on, especially when I went into the military, of how can you restrain somebody? How can you just pin them down and wait for, if you have to apprehend them or something like that. And I would discuss this with different security forces, and I developed my different manuals I've written books, all kinds of things about martial arts and jiu-jitsu. And it just kind of just built on that. And, learning the different curriculums from the modern Army combatives and then the Air Force curriculum and what the Marines were doing. And I saw that there was a focus and a need for the apprehension technique. So I really focused in on that, and I developed my own system, if you will, called the Gunshin Taho Jitsu, which is like military personnel arresting technique. And I wrote like a large manual for this, and then I wanted to take the time to break it down, not just give someone the book and say, hey, here, study. I wanted to shoot the videos, and then I wanted to go further and say, well, I have all this time right now. Let me try to develop a program for like the teachers, and then we have the instructors training. So over the course of several years, from like the last 3 years of my life, I've always been working on this little project among my other things that are going on in life. But I'm excited, at the start of the new year, we're going to launch the website, and everything's ready to go.
That's really cool. I mean, I would like to keep people up to date on what goes on when that finally comes out. And I remember during our talk, we had a really great little mention or discussion about how martial arts tend to be viewed by lay people as being just a general, oh, well, you're a good fighter, or you're a good, you know how to handle yourself. But in reality, the specialized applications of what different arts can do are very distinct and very specialized. And I was intrigued about how you have put what you've put together in terms of the apprehension applicable techniques and approaches, because one of the things I remember encountering many years ago, I had a friend of mine who was an orderly at a hospital, and he wound up getting a 70-year-old guy that just started pummeling him because the guy kind of lost his mind, had a bit of a dementia kind of thing going on, but he didn't know how to handle it. This guy was hands all over his head, and he was smacking him around, but he was in that quandary of, well, how do I control this guy? I could easily overwhelm him because I'm younger, but I can't just punch him in the mouth. But yet, he couldn't just keep getting beaten on either. And, sadly, he wound up within that exchange leaving enough of a mark on this guy that he lost his job and he would never work in healthcare again.
Yeah.
And
wow.
Yet that's another specialized application of how do you control somebody absolutely without hurting them, but you can't just let yourself get beat on either. And I think the apprehension techniques that you're talking about are yet another subset of particular application where, people who need to control violent people would find that very applicable.
Yes. That's unfortunate of this story, but it does lend itself to a lot of the marketing that has been done in my classes or the people that I've been around. We've always said that, when we're practicing the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu or the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, everybody thought it was going to be like the ultimate fighting championship. And that was the initial draw in the beginning in the early 90s. And the Brazilians would come up to the country, United States, and, it became a very popular sport because of the federations that were established. And, the popularity grew with the ultimate fighting championship. But when he got into the academy and he started learning jiu-jitsu, everybody was learning like self-defense, the little children, the women, the average Joe guy who wanted to use this in his own way. And our instructors would always say, look, jiu-jitsu is a very effective martial art, and it gives you the ability, because things are based on leverage, to control the amount of pain you want to put on someone. And the positioning that's involved, you could actually punch the guy in, but you don't have to punch the person. You don't have to kick them, but you can still control the fight or even win the fight by verbal command or submission. So with all that being said, if I went back to your story, if that person would have known how to, handle that situation outside of only understanding kicking and punching martial arts, or knowing how to, have some restraining technique, they would have been able to not leave a mark, and they could probably still be in the career field of healthcare.
Sure. And a lot of times what I've noticed is in martial art classes, and not just, I'm talking standalone self-defense classes where this is a little bit more explicable, but even in longer-term martial art training, the assumption is you have an attacker, you're both standing, one starts beating on you, and really what you need to do is fight back and overwhelm that attacker. And it's usually portrayed like, well, this is a mugger, or this is, you've been ambushed in a street type situation. But the reality of violence has so many different applications and outcomes and things. I guess you'd call them rules of engagement. And that can change not only based on, are you a civilian, are you a law enforcement officer or security personnel, are you on duty or off duty? All these things
Yes.
play into it. Also, what is the circumstance right at that place and time? Such as, would you restrain a stranger, or would you restrain your drunk Uncle Ted who is going to hurt himself or somebody else if he's not held? Whereas a stranger, it's like, you're not my problem. I just need to be safe. So even within the same person, that application of what they might need martial arts to do can vary drastically from one encounter to another. Would you agree with that?
Yes, definitely. That is definitely the case, and it's that's why we need to continue to train in whatever we do. If you start off in one, like if you go through one portal into martial arts, you may end up in another portal of martial arts. So if you come in through the karate aspect of martial arts, that's what got you in the door, that's what got you into the community. Over time, it's okay that you end up at a judo dojo and you become passionate about judo. You change, your life changes, you are placed in different career fields where you have to change. Myself example, the moment I became a non-commissioned officer, they were like, you might have to apprehend one of your troops because they're doing bad to themselves or someone else, and you have to essentially arrest them. And I go, wow, I have to go forward, and I can't run away from that type of situation. So self-defense has its aspects of training, combat has its aspects of training, and then you have weapons. There's so many variables to the reality of violence, or having to make the right decision at the right time and do the right move to better the situation. And then people say, it's okay, I'll just have a gun. It's like, well, man, sometimes you won't have the gun, and other times you might have to defend somebody else, somebody that's in trouble. So you need to be able to step up as a man and defend the person next to you. So
that's true. In fact, a lot of people, and I know a lot of folks that are big on the carrying a pistol or carrying a firearm, and they really think, well, boy, if the maximum thing happens, I'm ready. I'm ready to get into a firefight, or I'm ready to, protect myself with my gun. But the reality is that right around 5% of violent encounters are actually intense enough to justify the use of lethal force. And I always think, well, what do you do for the other 95%? You going to shoot somebody just because they shove you, or like that? That's a very real application issue. And I think that as we get right at this current point in time, I think that Aikido and a lot of the, I guess you'd call them traditional, although even that word is kind of problematic, but a lot of the dojo style arts that assume, okay, the type of engagement you're likely to get into is you're going to be attacked by a mugger, you're going to be ambushed on a street. Really, the shift seems to be, okay, well, how do we start to include sparring? And it seems like from a layperson's standpoint, they think, well, all right, we're not going to just look at a mugger on a street. We're going to now look for, can you make your art succeed in a sport fight? Well, even that is remarkably different from apprehending somebody, or dealing with a drunk at a party, or somebody who's belligerent in a real room. It's a total different application. There are a lot of similarities, but there are quite a few differences too. What would you say about that concept?
Well, to finish up the gun aspect, I always say to people that, here's how I like to answer that question. Well, I can just have a gun. I go, well, having a weapon is just a particular distance. It's something that you can use. Like if I have a knife, I have to be at a certain distance. If I have a gun, I can be further away, or I can be close. But sometimes you're super close, and you need to know how to use your martial arts skills, for example, or your combatives. So I just kind of chalk it up with I'm not discouraging what you're saying, but I need you to understand that that's a tool or a weapon that can be used from a certain distance, and it might be the right tool at the right time. So I want them to start saying well, he's right. Maybe I should think about taking some type of martial art, for example. And then when you head down that path, it's, you're talking about sparring and performance-based martial arts versus the traditional martial arts and things like that. It really comes down to the environment that you're in and the training methodologies that you're being exposed to. All right. So you can walk into a empty room, you can put up any sign on the wall, but you have to start somewhere with context. So if you're going to say some basic like techniques in jiu-jitsu or martial arts from the 60s or something like that, they would have scenarios based on like a mugging, someone grabbing you. And that's where you started. And you have to start to learn what is the problem and what's the solution and how do I test this? How do I know that it's working? I had this conversation today on base after our class, our combatives class, and we were starting to break it down: self-defense versus, the fighting versus competition, and how those three pillars kind of influence your expression of jiu-jitsu and your learning. And am I being too self-defense oriented, or am I being too competitive, or how do I defend if someone's trying to punch me in the face? And I just said, this is what has to keep you honest, because sometimes you get really good at competition, and you get into some positions that are very flamboyant. You're upside down, and it works really well for the sport, but you can't apply that in a real situation. And that type of martial art wasn't what my generation started for. We started because we wanted to learn how to fight, and then we quickly learned that using the concept of the fight, that will help us understand this martial art in a real way. And then we could learn about the self-defense techniques that were the classic techniques of jiu-jitsu and aikido, and how judo influences into the martial art. So whatever point you're at, you're only going to stay there for so long. You can't keep it up. You're not going to be doing self-defense for your whole career in martial arts, your whole journey. It's got to change, or you're not going to last. That's how I feel. And for those people that can do one thing for 20 years, I have the most respect for them. Even if they are doing something that is not combat oriented, it's just something that's good for them. That's good for that. That's that person, and I have respect for that. But they also have to keep reality that what they're doing is not effective in other contexts.
Well, yeah, and I suppose once somebody hyper specializes in one area, they're kind of like the guy with a hammer that sees every problem like a nail. And I've got a sport background, and when you get into competition, what I relate to after doing this for a few decades is you do get into that I need to dominate sort of mode. I'm going to use all of my tools. I want to analyze my opponent, find out what his weaknesses are, what his strengths are. My goal there is to apply my strengths to his weaknesses in order to prevail and win a match or win a tournament. But yet, if you back it up and you take a look at a violent encounter with a civilian on a street, you've got to do a lot of strategic analysis to say, do I even go down that road? Because if you go down that road and you realize only once you say, okay, now I'm going to get into a competition with you, you don't realize he's there with four friends until it's way too late. So in my mind, there's a layer of strategy there. It says, in this moment, now the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up. Something's wrong. All right, what's the situation? I'm here with my wife. I'm here with my child. They're in danger. I need to get them out. I'm not going to engage in a young man's chest puffing competition, even just with what I have to do in terms of saving my family or saving my loved ones, and then assessing, okay, well, let's say I'm alone. Maybe I'm with a buddy of mine, and I look and say, well, there's 5 guys over there. I'm not going to take 2 on 5. That's just not a situation that's going to play out. So that limits your, how do I save myself? And I remember having a fellow martial artist tell me of a situation he was in many years ago where his ex-girlfriend invited him to her wedding. She was marrying somebody else. They were still friends. And he thought, well, I don't know if I should go. Her dad really never liked me. Her brother really never liked me. In fact, disliked me. But because it's her, she really insisted. And he came and he made his appearance at the wedding and went to the reception. The brother and the father proceeded to get drunk. He said, I stuck around probably longer than I should have, and sure enough, the brother worked up his Dutch courage and came over and started a physical situation with them. And it kind of came to that situation where he realized, do I really need to be in this room anymore? Have I made my appearance? Do I need to be here? Do I need to engage with this drunk guy and his whole family? Not just the brother, but the brother, the father, all the friends. And how is that going to play out? And he kind of made a graceful exit, but it wasn't before the bride actually had to get in between him and her brother to keep it from just going kind of crazy. And, you think about, well, what martial art would you train for that situation? Well, it really wouldn't matter any of them. If you just have the basic sense to realize, how is this likely going to go? It doesn't matter whether you're a boxer, wrestler, sambo guy, jiu-jitsu guy. If you're an idiot, you're going to get into a bad pickle. It's not, no martial art or no amount of technical skill is, or you're carrying a gun. Those technical skills are not going to solve your problem. It's your brain that's going to solve the problem.
Yeah, I'm happy that the scenario worked out in the narrative there. If I would have had if you would have told me another story of another friend of yours that lost,
right,
I would say there's something wrong with your friends. They need to train, they need to train something that was working, so they start winning the narratives when you hear the stories. But
exactly, and even in retrospect, he said,
if you're losing in the real life and you're losing in the narrative, that you're wrong.
Exactly,
you need to figure out what you're doing.
And he said, in retrospect, I probably should have left earlier to avoid even the dust up. But,
yeah.
The fact that you get a bride who now has to deal with a possible fight at her reception between drunken relatives and her ex-boyfriend, I mean, those are the life situations that tend to happen. It's not just you're outside an ATM machine and you get mugged, like the typical caricature of violence that's often portrayed by martial arts instructors and practitioners, where they imagine, what could happen. This is the crazy stuff that you never really see coming.
It's true. And when I said that, when my generation, we wanted to learn how to fight, and I learned jiu-jitsu, the effective stuff that was in the UFC before it became very popular was, learning how to fight on the ground. It was like a different time and place. And we had a lot of like the Gracie Challenge and all this stuff. And it would happen at my academy. And, I have a lot of stories about that. But the byproduct of watching myself being involved in this, or other people around me that were winning the narratives and the stories, and everybody having the war stories, and it was how quickly I understood that it was harder for me to beat people inside the gym than it was to wrestle someone in high school at the weekend party or something like that. It was very easy to, when I was always small, my nickname in jiu-jitsu is Little Tony. So I learned jiu-jitsu. I was like 130 pounds, soaking wet. And I have like the classic jiu-jitsu marketing narrative. I was a little guy and all my friends were bigger. And after 3 months of jiu-jitsu, I could start to beat up my social circle of like tough guys and beat up on them, like, make them tap out. And it was very easy. And that gave me like a lot of confidence. And I was like, I got like almost like a power. I was like, man, I got to like keep this in check. And people would challenge me and all this other stuff. But in the gym, I couldn't do that so easily. For the first 10 months of my jiu-jitsu, I didn't submit anybody. I was just getting beat up and submitted and learning how to do defense and blah, 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 blah. And then when I went out and tried to do stuff on the weekend, I could destroy my friends and the different people like in the different social circles. So I've gone through all these stories or heard them in my journey about people telling success stories and things like that, that the quicker you can learn in any martial art that it's difficult to beat the purple in your gym. You don't need to test this stuff on the outside, and how quickly you can develop real self-confidence to handle yourself, and then to start to have like overall awareness in what's happening in dangerous situations. So the best byproduct of all this training is if something happens in your life with a loved one, or you're there and something's happening, if you're in a car and the car goes out of control, it's how you personally feel, how calm you are, how you can see the situation, because you train so much every day to put yourself under stress and pressure that you feel good. You feel like I can handle this. And that starts to project into your life when you're talking with people in a stressful situation, or just, stepping up for a job interview, or in the military, you got to talk to this officer and reposition yourself. It shows. And I really think that is the different environments that you find yourself in gyms. If you're not finding that, you're in the wrong place.
That's true, and one of the things that I find is maybe disappointing in the martial arts community overall, but I think it's shifting in a good direction, and that is that when you have people that are practitioners of a certain art or of a certain subculture within the martial arts world, and they think what we're doing is great and what everybody else doing kind of sucks, and they have kind of this elitist attitude. And I think that there's an awareness coming now where people realize Well, people from sport arts and sparring arts, they've got some value to offer to what me as a martial artist has, or people from the combative realm have got things that they can offer. And people from the real world violence realm, things like experienced bouncers, security people, law enforcement officers, the insights that they have about how real violence works, there's something of value there. So although these different realms are all separate from one another, they have a very common thread of principle that underlies all of them. They have things in common. And that the more you learn about the different realms, maybe not that's your own realm, but the more you get input from those realms, the better martial artist and more well-rounded martial artist you're going to be. And I see that is kind of a growing point, which is why the subject that we wanted to talk about today was, where are the martial arts going, or where are they growing into? I think is going to be an important one, especially as the 1800s is when martial arts really seemed to start branching off into their specialties, the Japanese arts along with others as well. But it's now seen that in our modern age, they've separated so much and hyper-specialized to such a degree that practitioners within them are starting to see such gaping holes that they want to start getting more feedback and input from the other ones so that they can start coming together again. And I remember us talking a little about that, and it seemed like to me that your program for the restraining techniques and apprehension techniques kind of plays into that, where somebody could say, I'm from a martial art that doesn't have any of those apprehension type techniques. I'd love to go and actually add that to my repertoire, but I don't want to jump into another art. I don't want to abandon mine. I don't want to get in Dutch with my organization, but I'd really like this subset of tools that I want to explore. And so that's why I was intrigued with the program you're kind of putting together, because it seems to offer like an a la carte approach to martial art training, which I'm very intrigued with.
Yeah, that's good. The idea is, even like, if I could just say, well, first you said some good big things. We started off with different martial artists and different groups that think they're so superior and things like that, right?
Yep.
And that's not good for the growth of martial arts, and it might have their benefits, how they feel about themselves and running their little dojo, but overall it's not good. What really grows martial arts is when different people come together and evolve something. And if something is dying out, there's a reason for it. But there are aspects that are still alive that can contribute into something else. So, like, I'm not reinventing anything about learning how to be eclectic and things like that.
Sure.
But in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, in the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, in the grappling culture, it's always evolving. Different martial arts of grappling. The Japanese do judo a certain way. The French think and do judo a certain way. The Russians, the Brazilians, they all do different. Like, within the speciality, there's like within it, there's a uniqueness. There's a speciality within the art, within the system, the little subsystems, if you will, and that's okay. And what happens is, a lot of these different martial arts, they have different rule sets for competition, and that's what really separates them. But everybody's trying to pick from like the best. Like 15 years ago, the Brazilians were really not doing the leg locks and things like that like they do today. So if you wanted to learn leg locks, you had to go learn like Russian Sambo. If you wanted to be very effective at the throws, you needed to go train judo. Now the different grappling arts are all starting to look like the same thing. They all look like each other. Like, the Russians are getting really good at the ground fight. The judokas are getting good at the ground fight, where the Brazilians are getting good at the leg locks. You follow me?
Right. They're merging. They're almost merging together.
Right. And it's like, man, you don't have to go around the world. You can just go to one gym, and now it's like starting all happening. And with like information that's out there, the internet, the videos, everything is at our fingertips. So now we have to just really train and get down to the principles of what we're doing, what's making it real. So for those people that are like, they think their art is so superior, I'm like, well, show me why. Because my approach is, I want to test it. I want to see what you're doing. I want to see how it works. I want to learn the nuances. And I've been doing this for so long, I don't care about the techniques. I'll be able to see the principle in what you're doing. And if I can't see the principle, I want to test your principle. And if you don't understand what I'm talking about, your technique that you think you're so superior at, you don't even know what you're doing yet. But I wouldn't say it like that. I would just, let's step on the mat, and then I just say, hey man, show me the move. And then I go, okay, and it doesn't work. Then what? That's a really hard situation to be in, because you're never going to be in a situation like that unless the environment lends itself to that. So people need to like have the courage to put on a white belt and go out there and evolve. So we want to say that our arts are dying out because our own people are allowing it. They don't want to, pass on their techniques. They don't want it. They get tired of doing martial arts. Their life changes. They have to keep that passion to keep it going, and they have to have that beginner mindset to keep on learning. So that's how you start off with your conversation about people that are being superior. We got to really get down to it. It gets down to the principle. It gets down to testing it. And if they can't make it work, they don't understand the full technique. And that's okay, because if you look to a different angle, you can say, oh, okay, well, the Japanese are doing it like this. The Brazilians are doing it like that. You're going to find your way to make it better. But you have to now change. You got to say, man, the way I originally learned this is a better variation. This is a better technique. I think I'm going to start to incorporate that. So for the Gunshin Taho Jitsu, there's a need for restraining technique. There's police officers every day and military people that have to go forward. They can't step back. They have to put hands on. And my thing was, when I'm talking to security forces, I say, how do you apprehend an airman? And every security forces had a different answer to me. One would say, I tell him to put his hands up and turn around and get on the ground. Others will use a taser. So there's always these different strategies. I was like, man, it has to be something better than that. And to be able to go forward and put your hands on someone, there has to be like a strategic approach to it, because you have to have a distance, and it's a certain distance that's in law enforcement or security forces in the military, where you're far away, but you're not too far away. And you know this if you've ever been around police officers. They stand a certain way in an interview stance. And when someone kind of walks close to them, they kind of they stop the guy. And they're just like, hey, man, you're getting too close, but back up. So you'll start to see this in law enforcement, how they stand and things like that. But they all do the same thing. Now it's like, how do you go from point A to point B and put that person on the ground? And that's where it comes down to, well, if I said to a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy, I said, what do you teach the law enforcement people? They say, well, we have like a specific program that's based a lot on the ground fighting. Other academies say, I just train like with the general class. I wanted to have a program that could work for all security forces, all law enforcement, all first responders, and work on those old school 1950s Taho Jitsu techniques. But then what happens if you can no longer bend the person's wrist? What if there's resistance? What if we have to test this? Where do we go from here? And then you got to start looking for answers. Well, the Filipino martial artists, they like to do this. The Brazilians like to do this. The military combatives, they like to do it like this. So I started picking and choosing and coming up with a strategy. And ultimately, my working theory was, how do you go from this phase to putting hands on to putting the person on the ground? That's 3 phases. And in my program, we call it PCSing. And PCSing in the military is permanent change of duty station. But in Gunshin Taho Jitsu, it's a totally different thing. And you need to know these 3 stages of having a distance, putting hands on, and then putting the person on the ground. And if you have that theory, it's almost like learning martial arts and kind of having a working strategy. How to close the distance in a fight, how to have distance in a fight, how to use your tactics through these different phases and use it as a strategy. And then you can start to learn the curriculum techniques. Well, if you have the wrist here, you can start seeing, if you have knowledge, you can start to see the Aikido. You can start to see the Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. You can see the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You can see these things. You can see the Kali, Mm-hmm. And that's what makes this program unique. And I'm happy that it's going to be launching, in January 1. Actually, the website's open now, but it's just the splash page.
Sure. One of the things that I've noticed in studying apprehension videos, and I do like to study this, and this has been confirmed by the law enforcement people that I train with on a regular basis, is that really law enforcement personnel are not really trained for one-on-one apprehension. That's not really, at least here in the United States, that's really not a major part of their, body of knowledge or the body of their training. They're kind of taught, just get a bunch of people and pile on somebody if they're really being unruly. And the videos, the surveillance video that I've seen enforces that. I've even seen ones where, 2 officers trying to restrain one person are getting in each other's way more than they're actually being
Yeah.
effective at doing any restraint, much less working as a team.
Correct.
And that's very, very common, and it's sad. And again, the police officers and whatnot that I train with, they're actually aberrations. They are rare in the fact that they go out and train in their spare time so that they can actually do what their fellow officers really aren't equipped to do or are not trained to do, which is to deal one-on-one with apprehending somebody in that sense, that rule of engagement of, I don't have 3 or 4 other people around here to help me. I got to do that. I'll do it myself.
Yeah, it's 100% true. And even it's difficult in all, like, people are so busy with their jobs and they have so many things that they have to keep up to date, and they have so many appointments that they have to make. And then, okay, hey, we need to train our combatives or law enforcement training, whatever, defensive tactics. And it becomes a short period of time during the course of the year. And I'm talking very short, maybe like a little bit of training in one quarter, a little bit of training in the second quarter. And then the onus is on the person, if they really like it, to go join a martial arts school, or maybe there's something in the department that has some training that you can continue. So now it's like, not everyone's going to be passionate about combatives, but it's very, very important to the job. You follow me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's very important for officers to work together. And a lot of the programs will address these things. It's just sad that if someone doesn't train and they only do the quarterly training, when they go to the next quarterly training, it's a lot of review from the old, that nothing really evolves. You just keep doing the same thing over and over again, and their skill set doesn't go up, or what they're doing is just very, very limited. And it's like someone going to a self-defense class and they learn like one trick for this particular problem. Well, what if the person changes a little bit? Well, your one trick doesn't work. Then you would have to know another trick. But it's not a game of tricks. You need to be able to have something to fall back on, a system. And then it's like, well, this guy was kind of good at boxing. So when he teaches the combatives, you can see the boxing influence. Or this guy, he's like a jiu-jitsu guy, so you can see that he likes to influence a lot of jiu-jitsu. And that's what happens in all of the instructors. They all have their specialties, and they start to influence what they're good at, which is very natural. But not everybody can do the same things. Everybody's different. And people that are really good at in 1 year, over the course of 3 or 4 or 5 years after an injury, you have to keep evolving, and you have to keep changing your approach to do the things that you did yesterday, and things are changing for tomorrow. You follow me with that?
Yeah,
that idea?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
and what I'm seeing is
it's not. I don't have like all the answers, but I wanted to start off and at least try to address certain things and put some thought into it. Write a 500-page book, and then put it on video, and then reach out to different instructors. And that was one of the reasons why I was able to befriend Lenny Sly from a distance, because I really, really liked his approach to the particular pin in the tension Aikido, the standing pin, and not going on your knees in Aikido, and like some of the different federations teach in Aikido. I don't want to be on my knees. I want to be standing. I want to be putting my knee pressure on top of the person, like in ju-jitsu. So I start to handpick the techniques and the applications for things that I felt were effective, and then how do we test it? Let's test it. And if it was effective, we kept it. If it didn't, we wanted to fix it and make the basic technique more profound, trying to find the principle. And when you start to find the principles of what you're doing, you're going to start to see different lenses of different arts, and they pretty much do speak the same language. And that's why you can travel the world and train martial arts.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I did with my own dojo is I realized I don't want to kneel on the ground with my pins. And so I started evolving the pins that I used myself and that I taught my students, with the explanation of, why would you ever want to kneel in gravel or on pavement or on concrete or on a, slippery bar floor or whatever? You would rather prefer that you're standing. And I think that every martial artist, as they start thinking about, well, what does my art do, and is it applicable for what I envision that I might need it for? And that, when they think about, well, if I might need to defend myself in an actual fight, what are the tools that I would need for that? And as people, there's one thing to trust that your instructor is going to do all that R&D for you and then hand you that prepackaged set of here's the skills that you should have, my student, or you get to that point where you realize, my instructor gave me some great things, but maybe there's some things that I can look for outside of what he's given me that can add to what I really want in myself. And as people do that, I think that that a la carte sort of approach may be something that the arts grow into, especially as I covered in a podcast a little bit ago about how organizations are actually detrimental to the art and the development and the innovation that go into them. They tend to limit themselves over time rather than expand themselves over time. And so I think in the if we look 5-10 years ahead, I bet there's going to be a lot of programs out there that say, you know what, you don't have to study our whole art, but you can take some great things from us. I don't care if you're a judo person or a sambo person or a karate guy. If you want to learn what we do, here's how you do it. Just come and we can share our content with you. For example, Aikido dominates joint locks. I don't think any other art out there does some of the joint locks as well as Aikido tends to do them. Whereas somebody like a practitioner like judo does throws extremely well. I don't even think there's any art that does throws like judo does. And I think all arts have some really great, some great technical things to offer that they do better than everybody else. Like, imagine what the martial arts world would be if these groups started coming together and saying, we're going to throw our best stuff into the mix and let's see how it blends together. Every time I've done this, and granted I've not studied all arts or anything like that, but just the things that I have studied, I find that they blend together far better than I ever imagined when I started them. They didn't seem to fit together until I trained them for a while, and then I saw the common threads of how all these things really fit together nicely.
That's true. That's it. And it's a way of thinking. It's a way of having your eyes change with the mission of what you're doing, and that's it. I mean, when I keep every example that you give, if it's like judo is good at throws, it's to understand those throws. You're understanding a different distance. So like the clinch is a very close distance, or the judo grip, when you have that kemikata, when you have that certain distance, the throw can be applied differently based on the uniform, based on the rules. And then sambo, it can be a little bit more close, and then the throw looks a little bit different. But you still need to learn the principles of the throw. And those principles are applied in all different cultures of grappling. And how that certain distance can be applied for a small joint manipulation, a koda gayash, for example. How you can apply that at this particular moment, because this particular angle that you have and this particular resistance that the person is giving you, you can apply this right now. But you would never know that if you never learned the terminology or how to apply the technique of koda gayash, for example. Mm-hmm. And it just takes time. And nothing happens overnight, and it really comes down to, you say like the want, but it's really the need. It's discovering what you need. And if your instructor can teach you how to think and problem solve, you'll be able to leave that gym and go somewhere else and, be close to another influence, someone that's going to give you the answers on a silver platter. But sometimes that silver platter is not going to be there. That instructor that you had, or these 2 or 3 great instructors that you had in your life as mentors, they're no longer there, but they've taught you how to think and how to see technique and how to question and how to test and how to train and not get hurt and pass it on to someone else and learn how to teach. All of those things are going to help you when you're far away from the person that's giving you all the answers. You're going to discover the answer.
Yeah, one of the things that as you were talking about that, it came to my mind, the idea that when you hyper specialize, really you're heading towards a certain amount of irrelevance. You can have the nicest hammer in the world, but when you encounter a bolt, it really isn't going to help you very much. And I think this is, as an instructor, it's easy with your students to think to yourself, okay, I'm not great at everything, but the few things I am good at, I'm going to teach my students, and I'm going to really make sure they're really super good at that subset of things that I know. And in essence, then, the instructor kind of becomes a bottleneck, in that if your aptitude is for something that the instructor doesn't have, you're not going to really have that fulfilled. And so I know I, as an instructor, am very adamant that my students get in front of other instructors, work with other practitioners in other arts. I bring instructors in and other martial artists in to teach them directly. I try to cross-train as much as I can to get influences from other people, because all of that stuff very much enriches what we are as martial artists. And I think that I would really hope in the best of all worlds that martial artists in general can kind of lose their kind of arrogance and pride in their art and be a little more accepting of what all the other arts and these other instructors have to offer, because they all have got great stuff. There's such tremendous value in when we collaborate versus when we are kind of at odds with each other, or trying to be elite to what our art is and sort of dismiss what other people are doing.
True. And, we started this conversation off. You said, I'm on the phone with Tony Pacenski, and he's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner. I hope that by the end of the conversation, me speaking to you as an Aikido specialist, that in my point of view, maybe yours as well, I see Aikido as a subset of overall jiu-jitsu, spelled a different way. And it's, you think about in the past, when we go into the dojo, the academy, we see the different imagery of our masters, and they taught us the basics. And for us to understand the echoes of where they were trying to get to, we have to go deep with our basics and our understanding in a profound way of our fundamentals, so that we're doing less instead of more, and we start to see the principles of what they were getting at. And then that way you can easily make the threads and connection to different arts. And at one time, in place, all the different martial arts were taught as one. They were like, you had to learn a lot of things, and it was all just taught. And it was over the years that things just kind of broke apart and went its different ways, just because, culture changed or society has changed. And, things had to, be passed on some way. And it got passed on because maybe like that boxing instructor, who's really the combative instructor that teaches boxing, maybe he felt he enjoyed and he specialized at boxing, and he did his best at that point in time to pass on the combatives. But, in his heart, he knew he wished that he could have more than just passing on the boxing, for example. So it is difficult, to know all the things. And I hope that people can define what they're doing, and eventually don't even call it anything. You don't have to even call it jiu-jitsu. You're just learning movement. You're learning principles that are going to help you. You're learning martial arts, or you're learning combatives, like something simple, but you don't have to focus so much on the discipline, just to get started. And then if you really want to head down that direction, there's always a place to go to really, really focus in and master something.
That's true. In the cross training that I've done, I've noticed that the more you see a principle echoed in other arts, the more universal that principle and fundamental is. And when you find a principle that is so universal that almost every art has it, and not even just martial arts, if you see it echoed in other things too, you will now know that you're getting down to the root, like a true principle that's not been altered because it fits in a certain sport realm or a certain combative realm or an academic realm, but it fits in all of them. Now you're getting down to a true fundamental of hoplology, or of the science of human combative behavior and performance. You're really getting to it when you see it everywhere. One of them being get out of the way of an attack. Like you see that in boxing and wrestling and everything.
Yes.
And so I really hope that the arts that have kind of become estranged from one another start growing back together again. And I think that even conversations like we're having here, we appreciate the strengths that each other have, that rather than picking on each other's weaknesses and saying, well, we're better than you are, and you're, that whole thing. And the internet, I'm sure, is just like a magnifier of that, with bickering that goes on within those realms. And it kind of goes back, I'm sure, millennia, with people arguing, well, my school is better than yours, or my culture is better than yours, or anything.
Yeah. Look, here's the thing. I'm not a master in jiu-jitsu from Brazil, but I've been doing this for 25 years, and I've been around some the grandmasters, the masters of our particular blend of jiu-jitsu. And I've been in rooms where, the famous guys are on the mat, and people I idolized, people I've was looking when I was coming up as through the development belts, a blue belt. I was watching them win the world championships, and they're the masters of today. And sometimes you'll get an opportunity to show something to these masters, and I think one of the best compliments that you can get from them is for them to just say, there's something there.
Yeah, definitely.
They can just say that there's something there, like what you're doing is there's something there. And people that are really, really, really good at something, and they've been around, they've seen this story play out a lot. The young black belt showing the old black belt a technique, right? But the situation what I'm talking about is very deep, where the person said there's something there, because they're acknowledging they didn't see something like that before. They're respecting it, and they see the principle. Versus somebody that's just starting, they don't know what they don't even know what to see. They don't even know what they're looking at. So on the internet, they'll just say, that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And I just say to them, well, pick up where I left off. Instead of criticizing, pick up where the person left off, make it better. Or maybe see the next video, or maybe study a little bit where we're going with this. Cause you get, you only get to see a little bit of a clip on a video, and that's not enough information. So don't be so quick to criticize and laugh when the masters are smiling and saying there's something there. It's a totally different spectrum, and it takes a lot of time for you to be able to have the right eyes to see things like that.
I love the way that you phrase that, because that's a perfect description of every time I read Book of Five Rings by Musashi. And I've been trying to read that book and understand it for 30 years. And every single time I read it, I pick out something that rings a bell, or the light bulb goes on over my head, and then a bunch of stuff that makes no sense whatsoever. But I'll come back a year or two, 5 years later, and I'll read a sentence that made no sense, but only then will something make sense to me, because of the understanding that I've built through my training, through my competing. And I'll be like, why did I never see this before? It's like a whole new meaning that was there, but I could not see it. And I think what you're describing is the interpersonal experience of the very same thing. Because people, when their understanding is at a certain level and they get exposed to a concept that's much farther above them, or farther above their experience level, they can see it and not even see it, not even comprehend it.
Well, that's interesting that you say that. And, of course, your eyes change every time you read that book. And, we've done martial arts for so long. And when I started, I was always reading the magazines. I just wanted to write like an article one day to be in the magazine, Black Belt magazine or something like that. Mm-hmm. And you get to a point where you actually do have a story. You've lived this wild, crazy life before you joined the military, and you've been around these great people. And my first book that I ever wrote about jiu-jitsu was called The Story of Invisible Power, A Path Toward Jiu-Jitsu Principles and Execution. And this is not a manual of techniques. It's a book about principles and the invisible jiu-jitsu that's made famous by Rickson Gracie. And I got his permission to write the book and everything. And I remember one person, he emailed me, and he says, I just started jiu-jitsu, and I wanted to buy a book and learn the techniques. And your book doesn't have the techniques. And I said, sir, my book is not a manual of techniques. My book's the principles. And I said, how long have you been doing jiu-jitsu, sir? He said, I just started, I have my white belt and things like this. And I really don't, I want to, he's going on and on. But I said, listen, I'll give you the money back. I'll send you the money. Don't worry about the money. I go, but here's what I want you to do. When you get your blue belt, when it happens, I hope it's in 10 months or a year from now, I want you to pick up my book and I want you to read it again. And when you get your purple belt, I want you to read my book again. And then when you get your brown belt, read the book again. And then when you get your black belt, I want you to look at my book and read it one more time. And then he was like, okay. And he just kind of ended the conversation. But that's the truth. Every time someone picks up the book, they get lost in one of my little narratives or one of my experiences of being with these masters and what I was thinking, what I was doing, and actually being a black belt for 15 years. That means like black belt 10 years plus. And when you start getting around the real martial art, the real person, the real deal, you have to like really analyze what you're doing, because there's a lot of things that you could be doing wrong. And when you go back and look at all your basics, you're like, what the hell have I been doing? What have I been doing for the last 10, 15 years of my life? It can be better. So that's what the book is about. The book is about invisible jiu-jitsu, and that's the principles. It's not your expression of techniques and learning more and more and more techniques and going in a linear direction. It's about going with your fundamentals deep and going down in the ground and expressing yourself in principle. And when you can start to express yourself in principles in your expression of the art, that's going to bleed into your classes when you're teaching people things that they can use on the mats or in their life. You follow me? And then if you're going to be exposed to other martial arts and learn and come from this type of angle, you're going to help a lot of people, even if they don't even help you with what your goal is. For you to just touch them, be in their presence, and help them with some of the good things and they deserve it. That's a good thing.
Yeah, it's interesting that you describe it in that way, because as you say that, I've reflected on the people that I've trained or see trained that go from one art to another. The ones that transition the best and the fastest are the ones that have dug deep into those fundamentals of what makes their base art work. They tend to see those principles come out in the new art that they're practicing, and they start getting good really, really fast, because they can connect the principles they learned in their art with the new art. The people that I've seen struggle have never done that really deep dive. They just think of, well, my art is these movements or these particular techniques, and they almost have to go back to like square one or a blank canvas, because they don't have those deep principles that they have an understanding of, that they can apply to the new art. And that there's tweaks and changes and more cosmetic differences than there are fundamental differences. I've noticed a great deal of fundamental similarities when it comes to the principles of almost all arts.
That's true. I want to leave you like one story, then we can like kind of wrap this up.
Sure.
But it was a good one. It was I had my when I started jiu-jitsu, it was like I was reading the magazines of Michael D. Pasquale Jr. and everything like that. And then when the Gracies came to town, I wanted to train with as many Gracies as I could. And I learned from like Elio Gracie, the Grandmaster, Hoist Gracie, Horion, Helson Gracie, Kaiki, like big names in the sport. And the one Gracie I wasn't able to train with was Hickson Gracie, because he was on a different team, or it didn't work out. So fast forward, we become friends. We start the Jiu-Jitsu Global Federation with Carlos Gama, and a byproduct of all this work and getting the federation together and things like that was I was able to work on curriculum with Hickson, and I have a master's degree in education and curriculum instruction. So I was like, this is like my wheelhouse. And I never got a chance I went to a seminar here or there, but I never really got a chance to learn the Hickson Gracie's approach, this invisible stuff and all these different concepts. He's talking about connection and things like that, and just making what you already know better in a very, very efficient, effective way. So in a sense of learning how to teach better, learning how to be a better practitioner, better expression, I hit the jackpot. And one day we were talking, and he was saying, Tony, I want you to, teach the lessons here and like do the seminars and things like that, because you have the look, you could speak English, you have the body, you're not like an older guy. And I was like, that wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to make the transition to the military. But I just remember being in that conversation, and he was like, we were talking about like having the answers to the unknown, right? Like new techniques that are going to come down the out of competition or things like that. New techniques. How do you solve those problems? And I felt like a selfish kid in the sense that I had learned how to do this jiu-jitsu all in a very profound way, with the invisible techniques, all this connection and just my own expression was like, I understood leverage better than I ever stood before. My understanding of base and posture is beyond like what it was, and all these things. And we were talking about how do you problem solve, and he was saying that his older black belts, his the masters, the guys that are older than me, is like they know how to think in principles, and they will discover the answer. And I was saying to myself, man, I want to be like them, but I felt so selfish that I had learned how to teach like this. I learned how to apply the techniques like this. And I just told that to him. I feel like I want to be like them. I want to be like the masters. And he just said to me, he said, Tony, you're on the right path. You're going to get there. And I thought that was like really, really important to have that conversation, and to know that, and how my teaching would go on, because I used to teach like having the sequence figured out for people. And I wanted to put together a nice sequence, put it on like a DVD, and help my friends understand these complex techniques, and kind of, here's my revisions, here's my evolution, and here's a name for it. And the techniques are going to make you better, and it'll make you know more and more and more. When you're training with Hickson, you start learning less, you start doing less, and you get more effective. And my technique became very, very fundamental, was going all the way back to all the basics, and then learning how to teach like this, because that was a very important thing. It's like, man, I want to be able to express myself like him, and I want to be able to teach like this, not like his father, who I left my parents when I was 18 years old and flew across the country on a one-way ticket to learn how to teach like the Gracies, not to go study in university to learn from an academic point of view to learn how to teach. I want to learn how to teach like this. I want to be able to teach people to see the invisible jiu-jitsu. And how do you do that? And he taught me how to do that. And then when it came time to answer the unknown questions, I was like, I want to be like the masters. And he said, you're going to get there, Tony. You're on the right path. So that to me was like one of my best compliments. And knowing that I would have to change, I would have to start teaching all this invisible jiu-jitsu, present it like this, but then tell the people at the beginning that we're going to learn more than what you should already know. And we're going to learn more than the invisible jiu-jitsu. I would like to teach you how to problem solve and how to test what you're doing, because that's the real way that you're going to be able to discover if it's working or not. And that's what I like to pass on in my seminars. I love to go there or sit in a room and say, listen, we're going to do everything today that you should already know how to do. And the moves are this, this, and this. And we're going to see, what it is that we're going to do. And then when I get out there, I show them like that there's some things missing. And that's okay, because today we're going to understand the principles, and we're going to look at your leverage, and we're going to make it 10 times better. Because every black belt in this room, there's one thing that you need to be able to do is understand leverage better than before. And everyone starts to agree. Like, that's true. Like and people you can listen to someone, you can read about that. But the only real way for me to show you that you don't understand leverage is to get you in a position that you already know, and then point out a flaw. And then that puts the person on the spot. Like, man, I'm saying, man, I'm not doing anything technical, sir. I'm not doing a martial arts move. I'm just doing what any strong person could do. And for you to do this move and then have to do the variation, there's something wrong with your first move. And everyone's shaking their head like, my God. And then you look around the room, and it's guys in coral belts, masters, like starting to shake their head. And you might be in a different country one day. No one speaks English, and you're getting this translated. And your wife, that's Brazilian Portuguese, she's saying the translation the fastest she can, but she doesn't have to say anything. People can see without me even speaking that there's something there. So that's what I do. I challenge people on their principles. And if they don't understand the principles, they don't understand the art of where they're going. And at the end, I was like, there's more than that, guys. We need to be able to learn how to think this way, not only express ourselves in this way. And when we can do both of those things, we can look to the walls, look to the masters, and say, hey, man, I know where you were going, and we're going to all get there.
Yeah, and I think that just to, I guess, put a final cap on it, it's with the concept that you talked about is, and how it relates to the topic of this, which is the new frontier and the future of martial arts, is to, I think, to get to those principles and leave behind the dogma of, well, this is not my art, I'm going to learn principles that are of your art, but I don't want to do that because my art should have everything that it has. And if people get aware of that, and really, I guess it's the next generation of what Bruce Lee went through when he looked at everything he was taught and just rejected the stuff that he felt was not useful and embraced the stuff that he found that was useful. And it didn't matter from what source. It didn't matter what art. It didn't matter whether it was fencing or savate or boxing or anything that he ran across. Like, I think that's where any art, if they took that sort of mindset, that sort of almost science-like study and clarity towards what is efficient, what works, what are the principles that are sound, that's what I'm going to attach myself to, not merely a labeled art or a family system or a copyrighted or trademarked art of some kind, because it's all packaged up slick. It's the principles have got to be there. And I think if we look over time, we look forward 10, 15, 20 years, we may not see ju-jitsu, aikido, judo as much of separated arts as they are now, more of a combined art where they start learning from each other and start coming together, because human combat is human combat. And the intent, aikidoists get into this a lot with the intent shouldn't be to dominate or to fight and dominate. But if you want to end a fight, you have to understand what fighting is. You have to thoroughly and intimately understand what the human body does when it is fighting, even though your attempt is to merely control it. You may not be fighting yourself in your own mind, but you are navigating combat, and in order to navigate it safely, you have to understand it down to its roots. At least that's my interpretation.
I think it's a good interpretation. I want you to, even in your own words, I want you to kind of stick to the word navigation, because in a real fight, you may not be able to control everything, but you can influence some stuff. You can influence it, and maybe you come out on a successful way, or maybe back to your friend at the wedding. I think it's really hard for me to show up at my ex-girlfriend's wedding, and I don't think that would have been the right place for me to be. So just having some experiences in life, knowing the father, knowing the situation, I probably would have missed that party, and I wouldn't have gotten in trouble.
That's probably where the smart money would have been.
You can influence. Yes. But thank you very much for tonight. And it was a great conversation.
Yep.
And I mean, in 15 years, maybe everything doesn't have to be so big. Like, okay, maybe a picture 15 years from now that all the martial arts are going to come together. They're not. They're going to, in a small way, things are going to start to connect. And then over time, hopefully you get some big changes that seem to happen overnight, but they really didn't.
Correct.
And that's the real thing. So we'll all navigate in the right way, and the smarter ones that have the passion and they have the principles and they have the persistence, they're going to kind of come together. So it'll be good.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Tony, for being on the podcast. I had a great time and a great conversation. So I really much appreciate you coming on and sharing your stuff. I will have you send me a link, and I'll put it in the description area of the show to send people to your site so they can go and check out your program.
Hey, thank you very much. That'd be great.
Thanks, Tony. Have a good night.
You as well.
What do you think? Please share your ideas in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube or BitChute, or go to the Facebook group Aikido the Martial Side and post a comment. The Spirit Aikido Online program is now live. Subscribers get access to video training and mentoring to techniques and training methods that I've adopted from other martial arts to make my Aikido more practical. There is a link in the description section. I invite you to check it out. I always enjoy hearing from listeners of the show, whether through comments or questions. Thank you all for sharing your interest. Enjoy your training.